It's the week ending Saturday the 14th of January, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Bolsonaro supporters storming government buildings in Brazil, the UK government answering ever-increasing strike action with a proposed anti-strike law, and Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, becoming the UK's fastest-selling non-fiction book ever. You can read more about all of that in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Kate Samuelson and Jamie Timson. And we welcome back book reviews editor for the International Affairs Journal, Mariana Vieira. And Kate, I understand this is to be your swan song.
I know, I can't believe it, but I'm actually leaving the week at the end of this month, which is really sad. And I have a lot of mixed feelings about I'm going to miss the team so much.
And that slight quibble we can hear in your voice, that's not emotion. You do have a bit of a fever today.
Yeah, I also have the flu as I'm recording this. So the whole thing feels quite bizarre.
We'll be sorry to lose you, Kate. Where are you going?
I'm actually going to join a small media startup called The No as editor-in-chief, which is a big step up for me and feels like a great opportunity. But I really will miss my amazing team so much at the week.
The No as in K-N-O-W.
That's right.
Not just... Yeah, just a really negative organisation. All right, well, good news. You can let rip today, Kate. Let us know what you really think. You can't be fired. All right, Jamie, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This was the week we heard lawyers say, AI object.
This is going to change the game forever. Because you know what lawyers, like the thing with lawsuits and stuff, you go through all this paperwork. With artificial intelligence, run through stuff like this. AI is quick, it's fast, it's scary how fast it's moving. But AI is really fast-paced. It can go through stuff, find loopholes really fast. If this app is successful that he's creating, it will help a lot of people, save a lot of money for people. And this is going to be a billion-dollar industry immediately because people are going to stop hiring lawyers. They're going to get lawyers for big cases, obviously. Like, if you have a huge case, you're going to get a lawyer. But if it's like for a ticket, like let's say a parking ticket, a speeding ticket, or like stuff like that, misdemeanor, stuff like that. People are just going to get an AI lawyer and they're going to read through the case and they're going to help you find loopholes and help you save money in the process.
YouTuber Yeffy Island earlier this week giving his take on your story, Jamie, which is what? What's he talking about?
He is discussing the company Do Not Pay, which has created a form of generative AI. What we mean by generative AI is artificial intelligence that can be used to create. In this case, it's tech, or it's like a chat. But we've talked about on the podcast generative AI with regards to art and images. But Do Not Pay have created a generative AI which they say will be used in an upcoming court case where the defendant is charged with speeding. And they will say only what Do Not Pay's generative AI tells them to via an earbud.
So I just want to work this out. So the person who's being, well, it's a bit much to say charged with a crime, isn't it? If it's if it's a parking fine or whatever. But the person who's defending themselves, speeding. They don't have an attorney present. They stand up and defend themselves.
Yeah, no lawyer present.
With an earbud in.
Yes, and then it's a two-way thing. So the AI is listening to what what's going on in the court, and then it's replying with what the person should say in order to defend themselves. There are obviously a lot of ways into this discussion. They've said that they've found, they're not revealing where it is taking place, but they found a location where the setup can be classed as a hearing aid rather than, because there are obviously laws against using earbuds and that kind of stuff. So it's classed as a hearing aid. It's technically within the rules, says Do Not Pay, but I don't think it's in the spirit of the rules.
Yeah, says the tech bro founder of Do Not Pay, right? I mean, Mariana, this all sounds a little bit dodgy and a bit Silicon Valley. Like, we've invented this thing, let's do a press stunt where we get it into a court, but it's not really how the legal system works, is it?
I mean, I'm still just sort of wrapping my head around the concepts of this idea of having robots in the court. But it's also not the first time they were talking about having different AI initiatives or different AI mechanisms help with the sort of court proceedings. Either there's been initiatives to help. I don't know what to call it. Even is it mechanisms? There have been developments to talk about in terms of AI helping manage caseloads, robots giving testimonies. I just feel like it's getting a little bit out of hand to the extent that there isn't enough discussion or enough understanding, I find, of the implications of all of this that is proportionate to the amount of inventions, quote unquote, that we're seeing, or potential for the different ways in which AI can impact court hearings and proceedings before, during, and after.
That's what I mean, Kate. I mean, it's disruptive. So if you're working for a disruptive startup, then great, this is good news. But actually, for the legal system, it isn't good news, is it? This is a huge shift. People defending themselves with a computer telling them what to say in their ear. I mean, do you think it's really going to fly?
Well, I think for years we've been talking about AI coming along and stealing people's jobs, but often those jobs in question are ones like manufacturing or driving. And we haven't really discussed that in the context of the legal system and solicitors and barristers and what AI could mean for them. I think it's definitely worth pointing out that Do Not Pay have said that they will pay any fines should they be imposed on behalf of the defendant. So this poor person or lucky person, depending on how you look at it, who is taking part in this trial, they're not going to lose out if it doesn't all go to plan.
Well, unless they get sent down for contempt of court, right?
Yeah, it definitely does feel like a big shift seeing something like this taking place. But Do Not Pay has been acting not in this way necessarily, but on behalf of consumers for years through its sort of AI software. But the context that it's been supporting people is through things like challenging parking tickets, resolving customer service disputes, settling court cases, things like that, but not actually standing in as a robot barrister in court itself. So this is definitely a massive shift and a new thing taking place.
While obviously there are people that will look at this and kind of freak out about it, I think what's interesting is the way that they discuss the versions of the cases. They're not saying that these cases will be like human rights or Supreme Court cases. A lot of the time, in what happens in the US and also over here is that people defend themselves because they don't have enough money for a lawyer, or it's actually not really worth lawyers getting involved at all. In a lot of kind of class action lawsuits, small claims, that they're not getting lawyers in. And this is certainly one way of solving that issue, where if we can develop an AI that is as good as a lawyer, but doesn't actually involve the time of a human, which is the whole point of what we're trying to do with AI, I think, and bringing it in sensibly, is to use it for cases where we can help society. And there's certainly an argument to be made that this would help people in lower stakes scenarios where a person would otherwise go without representation at all.
I mean, do you buy that argument, Mariana? I suppose it sort of blows open the system where some lawyer's job is essentially replicating templates all day long for different clients. And you think, well, a computer kind of really could do that. You're doing the same thing for every client you have. But presumably having a human in the room being a bit more agile when things happen is useful.
I mean, I think there's three parts to the purchase of whether I buy what Do Not Pay has put forward. I would agree with Jamie. They have a really interesting argument in the way that they're framing their product as AI shaking up the tools and rules that determine the balance between powers of individuals and then governments and corporations, and I would say in this case the legal system, and to the extent that the decision is between no representation at all or no lawyer at all and some sort of AI they can help provide support. I see the benefits there, but I'm also quite skeptical about what the software can provide in terms of how can we know what types of biases it has into it. There's just so much that's still at the experimental level when it comes to AI. It's so many of the problems or issues that we're still not necessarily aware. And also the way that they frame it around giving regular citizens a chance to level the playfield in the courts also has to do with obviously how much it's going to cost to access the AI software. Because if you think in terms of a tech arms race, or not arms race, but definitely the more there's competition around and demand for the product, then the more likely the prices are to rise. And then to make it again something that contributes to structural inequality, in the sense that only people that can afford it will actually be able to have maybe 10 lawyers plus 2 AI softwares and so on, and just builds someone else's arsenal instead of perhaps the original benevolent mission.
Yes. I mean, it is an answer to the problem, Kate, but that's a good point, isn't it? It's kind of like the best answer to the problem would to be make sure that everyone had equal and fair representation.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think trying to make AI accessible to all is something that feels kind of integral to what a lot of these startups are standing for. So, for example, ChatGPT, which has made huge waves recently, it's a machine learning model that uses something called transformer architecture to generate human-like text. And it's making enormous waves. It's kind of transforming the whole AI industry, but currently that's accessible and free for anyone to use. You just have to make an account and you can experiment with it. You can ask it questions. You can have conversations with it. And currently that's open and free for all. Who knows what might happen later down the line, whether it will become more expensive and less accessible. But currently, right now, it does feel like a lot of these startups are prioritizing accessibility.
It's kind of terrifying, though, isn't it, Jamie, to imagine a world where even if this is accepted by the courts and people can stand up and use it and you can have the earpiece and everything, you are standing there relaying things you simply do not understand in a court of law. You're representing yourself without understanding what it is you're saying. Now, a lot of people who seek legal counsel don't understand either, but at least they have the opportunity to ask their barrister, what does that mean? And try and understand it. You are literally going to be parroting stuff out like you are a computer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the terrifying aspect of it is the thought of a lack of control. And the kind of counter argument to that is that probably in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years, we are going to lose control, whether we like it or not, of AI. To give some examples that Kate was mentioning, of ChatGPT, the people behind that, the OpenAI, Microsoft is looking to invest $10 billion into the company. I would be very surprised, and this is my own personal opinion, if once big tech companies get involved in this, whether the people involved in AI are going to be so benevolent. To answer the question about whether it's better to kind of parrot, at the moment, the only way to do it is through these earbuds, but eventually we could have a system where AI was a version of a lawyer. If it makes it easier to understand, you could have a robot up there, so you're not saying it, the robot is putting your case across for you. If that would help with the kind of terror, there's no difference really at some stage between that robot and a human lawyer.
Isn't the difference, though, about truth and ethics? I mean, the point about being in a court and arguing a case is that the qualified legal representative is not allowed to lie. So they have to bend what's available in terms of evidence to fit your case, maybe omit certain details, but make a case based on truth. And I do just wonder that a computer filling in a template might effectively, when it comes down to it, because it has no ethical judgment, just be lying for you, and you'd be going along with it.
It's important to say about the do not pay thing that they've said that they will not allow the AI to use any untruths or any false facts, and it will stick to the truth.
But then you might lose. I mean, a lawyer might have got you off. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's more complicated, isn't it?
Yeah. But the AI is going to improve hugely as it continues to be involved. I think my feeling is that this is a kind of, we can't put the lid back on Pandora's box now, and we have to work out how to live with these technologies. And when you look at the kind of rates of bias and problems in the legal system, both in right across the world, I think it's a kind of utopian dream to think that actually lawyers and judges themselves aren't affected by bias and problems. So why not give it to a computer as much as we do give it to a judge?
Kate, now you're leaving. Should we replace you with AI?
No, thank you. But just to jump onto what Jamie was saying, in some ways it's fairer, I think, for everyone. If everyone was to have access to the same AI, that feels to me like that makes the legal system more fair than if some people can afford better lawyers than others. And, just by virtue of your situation, your job, your privilege, does that mean that you should be able to afford the best lawyers who can argue your case and are more likely to win for you than if you're from a less well-off background?
Okay, and what if the judge was AI as well? What if ultimately we did have a computer deciding who goes to prison and who doesn't? I mean, that is the Terminator. I mean, that is literally the plot of science fiction. But you're saying, I mean, that's the logical conclusion, isn't it? A computer can do it better, so a computer can decide without bias.
I can see the problems with it come from, we've seen in America, there was this use of this compass system, which basically predicts reoffending rates for people. And they already use AI and computers to work out whether or not they should offer bail to certain offenders. And that system was found to be like hugely racist, basically. And so the problem is always with the data that we put into it and whether or not we can ever achieve truly objective nature. I think personally, being and this is an incredibly privileged place to be in, because I am white and middle class and everything. I can see that what Kate's argument about it being fairer if everyone has the same access and if we regulate it and if we get to a stage that it would be, there isn't that much difference between a judge who is an AI robot and a judge who maybe has like loads and loads of prejudice or bias, or is even just tired. There were so many examples when I was reading this about judges after lunch being much more lenient than when they were further away from lunch. And it's like those small things can make a massive difference to people's lives. Are we not striving to try and eradicate those kind of things?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on two things, actually. One on the data. I find the idea of a robot judge still very utopian for the stage at which AI and data is at the moment, especially when it comes to structural bias, when the training data is actually insufficiently representative of the population. But also imagining that a robot judge because AI makes predictions based on averages that are drawn from group data. But on a criminal case, you're facing a single individual who might not necessarily tick all the boxes for the group in which they belong. And there's all these questions that are not just ethical but also practical, because the point that Kate was making about fairness is a big discussion right now between the computer scientists and the lawyers on the other side. So the computer scientists developing AI are sort of saying, why can't you just formalize the concept of fairness so that we can make it into a concept that the computer or the machine can understand? And you've had 500 years to do this. And then lawyers on the other side are sort of saying, well, the fact that fairness is an ambiguous term and means different things in different types of legislation is actually a feature and not necessarily a bug of the system. And there's I feel like until they're able to sort of work out and have this dialogue in a more productive way, we're in a way discussing AI to the extent that we will be sort of at the mercy of it as opposed to being empowered by the technology.
Okay, I am a bit hungry, so I'm going to move us along. Mariana, you're up next after this. Okay, Mariana, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is Taiwan on the market for a new savior?
So for Taipei, ever since the controversial visit of the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in August and then the subsequent Chinese military exercise around Taiwan, Taipei basically wants this tradition to be continued. So we have already seen a French delegation that visited last month, and then after this German delegation visiting, there are continued visits from different countries, a foreign delegation, including the UK, Canada, and Denmark. And for Taipei, they know that these publicity plays a very important role in terms of holding China accountable and also sending a very strong signal to Beijing that Taiwan is not alone in this fight, and there are more and more international recognition and attention being put and paid to the aggressive moves that Beijing have been displaying across the Taiwan Strait over the last few months.
DW News correspondent William Young talking about a German delegation visiting Taiwan in October last year. Mariana, it's happening again?
That's right. Germany lawmakers visited Taiwan this Tuesday as the island is facing heightened tensions with its neighbor, mainland China. Also, once again, including war games and military exercises across on the Taiwan Strait.
And the Lithuanians too.
So it's quite telling that German members of parliament are visiting Taiwan at the same time as the Lithuanian lawmakers are also visiting the island. This is because, as far as diplomatic messages go, it is relevant because Lithuania has been one of the most vocal supporters of Taiwan and the first European country in about 2 decades to allow Taiwan to name its representative office Taiwan instead of Chinese Taipei.
Okay. What's going on there then? Why is Germany making a big signal about this, and why is Lithuania so close? It's not, I guess, why is Lithuania so close to Taiwan, but why is Lithuania so prepared to stand up against China, I suppose?
So those are two different questions. So I'll try to answer both. So I think for the German visit, it's really important to see it in terms of the big picture. Germany has been cooling off its relationships with China since perhaps the mid-2010s. It has slowly been diversifying, or at least aiming to diversify its relationships in the Indo-Pacific. And it's one of the strategies through which they're increasing their diplomatic engagement is strengthening ties with other democracies in the region. So Taiwan sort of comes in here, and it's one of the issues that China and Germany are at odds with. So it's this kind of relationship where Germany is not really ever antagonizing China face to face or directly, but indirectly doing other things around the region to pretty much support or develop its Indo-Pacific guidelines that it developed 2 years ago, which is a concept that China itself is still against.
Okay, I mean, it's very much your specialist area, obviously. I'm curious, Jamie, as someone who doesn't know what's going on in back channels and doesn't think, how would the Chinese react to a particular visit?
How do you know?
I assume you're not a spy for the Germans or the Chinese. I'm just wondering whether you would see this visit, this support, as any different from what we have seen over the last year. Nancy Pelosi went there, didn't she, in the autumn? As we heard in that clip, the UK have sent representatives to Taiwan. Is this noticeably different to you?
No, I find that I'm kind of receptive to the idea that obviously it comes with this, like the huge kind of shadow of Russia and Ukraine and what Germany is trying to learn, even what the kind of West is trying to learn from what happened in Ukraine. And I kind of, I view it through that kind of lens, because I think what's like, intensely interesting and quite worrying is how the similarities between Russia and China, and then the differences between Ukraine and Taiwan. Ukraine is a sovereign state when Russia invaded, whereas Taiwan, doesn't quite have the same kind of legal entity. But it's clear that the threats are similar. China have made no secret of their intention to, one China policy, the one China principle. They've done an amazing job of trying to put pressure on everyone to basically disregard Taiwan. And Taiwan, from its perspective, has realized that in order to protect itself, it needs to prove that it's value to the world economy. So we've seen some really interesting discussions about semiconductors. I didn't think I'd ever say that in a podcast, but they are interesting discussions about semiconductors.
Interesting if you're trying to rent a car, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And global supply chains and how important Taiwan is there. So I think that's the kind of the overview, is that Germany needs to wean itself off these autocratic global superpowers. And so it's going over to visit with that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, when we last talked about Taiwan on the show, Kate, it was in the context that China might soon invade. I mean, that we were talking about it after Russia invaded Ukraine, and we were saying that it was Joe when he was on the show, wasn't it? Was saying that what China might do is use the war in Ukraine as a diversion, and then go for it, and copy Putin's tactics to an extent. But a year on, it ain't going that well for Putin. I mean, do you think the Chinese actually will pause? And if anything, that context might reinform how they're going to behave around Taiwan?
I think the situation between Russia and Ukraine has definitely informed what's going on at the moment in Taiwan and in China. And Lithuania and Germany have both described the situation, the war in Ukraine, as being a bit of a wake-up call in terms of trying to establish better relationships with Taiwan and kind of reinforce the importance of Western democracies and democracies in general. And the question about whether China's preparing for war, I mean, this is something that's now been talked about over the years, and it always feels like it's kind of on the horizon. Last October, China's president told the People's Liberation Army to focus all its energy on fighting in preparation for war, which obviously caused a lot of concern all around the world. But threats like that have been made many times over the years. There was a similar order in 2013, and then there was one again in 2016, and then again in 2017, the same threats were made. And although a lot of military analysts have played down a risk of imminent invasion, there is definitely a longer term threat that can't be ruled out.
What do you think, Mariana? Do you think they are at least reflecting on this in the shadow of Ukraine?
I have no idea, because they're a very opaque country in terms of trying to understand, and also feel like from the Western perspective, you will always have this sort of filter to it to sort of understand it as a heightened threat. But what I found perhaps a little funny or ironic was that Lithuania has said that they share a border with Russia, by the way. And they said that now they feel more secure because for so long they had to be alarming everyone that Russia might be a potential threat. And now that something has happened in Ukraine, they no longer have to go around saying, this is dangerous, something might happen here. And in a way, I feel like with the German visit to Taiwan now, the Taiwanese president said they called on Germany to help maintain the regional order. And this is sort of thing about this sort of discourse again of help, there might be a problem here, but we can't prove to you there is a problem until a problem has happened.
Why is this your story of the week, Mariana? What do you think are the repercussions from this?
Like I was saying, it's a bit more nuanced. When we see Germany's relations with China, it's never, we're going to cut ties. Pretty much like Lithuania just sort of came on board and said, the new government that took power in October 2020 said, we're going to harden our foreign policy. It's going to be a values-based foreign policy. And they sort of made these unprecedented steps that had never been made by an European country in relation to they barred Huawei from accessing Lithuania's 5G network. They withdrew from China's 17+1 dialogue with Central and Eastern European countries. So the baseline is that the diplomatic exchange have completely been downgraded and have deteriorated at a big cost for their businesses. However, Germany doesn't really behave in the same, I'd say, aggressive manner. And so seeing these little changes, seeing the fact that the lawmakers visited last year, that they visited this year, and also that a trip is set to be followed by the German Ministry of Education in the next few months. And this would be the first time a member of the German cabinet has visited Taiwan in the last 26 years. So you're seeing like a slow build up to something. I don't know to what, but it's definitely worth keeping an eye on.
And I think it's worth pointing out that Germany has really emphasized that this trip is all about solidarity rather than anything concrete, like, for example, providing Taiwan with weapons going forward. And actually, the Germans have made it really clear that that's not something that they're preparing to do in the imminent future or even long-term future, which I thought was quite interesting.
And China's reaction is also interesting, isn't it? I mean, like a 1980s British tabloid, they can't help but bring up the war.
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, they've expressed a lot of anger at this trip. And a spokesperson from the foreign ministry had a really interesting quote, which said that they wanted to point out that the root cause of the Taiwan issue stems precisely from the law of the jungle, hegemony, colonialism, and militarism that were once rampant in the world. China was deeply impacted by that. Germany has a deep and tragic historical lesson in that. And that was the direct quote from the foreign ministry, which I thought was really, really interesting.
I actually find quite interesting that there might be this assumption that it's about taking us back to the World Wars or World War II. But actually, within China, this a very big narrative of the century of humiliation in which a lot of the European powers took part. And Germany actually had some colonies, or almost every European empire had a colony on the coast of China. And so it might be also harking back to those themes of imperialism, how Germany somehow also indirectly contributed to this division between Taiwan and mainland China that you have coming back from the early 20th century.
Okay, Kate, you're up next after this. Okay, Kate, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
How ghostwriting as we know it may have become a thing of the past.
Harry, Grandpa's gone. The wind picked up, turned colder. I hunched my shoulders, rubbed my arms, regretted the thinness of my white shirt. I I wished I'd not changed out of my funeral suit. I wished I'd thought to bring a coat. I turned my back to the wind and saw looming behind me the Gothic ruin, which in reality was no more Gothic than the Millennium Wheel. Some clever architect, some bit of stagecraft, like so much around here, I thought. I moved from the stone wall to a small wooden bench. Sitting, I checked my phone again, peered up and down the garden path. Where are they? Another gust of wind. Funny, it reminded me of Grandpa. His wintry demeanour, maybe, or his icy sense of humour.
Prince Harry reading the audiobook version of Spare. Kate, you do understand the format of this show, right? We're looking for under-the-radar stories. What new angle do you possibly have on this thing that is dominating every single news bulletin at the moment?
Yes, don't worry. My story of the week is not about the publication of Prince Harry's memoir. It was hardly an under-the-radar story, considering it sold something like 400,000 copies on its first day of sale. But what has flown slightly more under the radar about the book is how it may have signalled a shift in the art of ghostwriting that might actually transform the entire industry going forwards.
How so?
So, to provide a bit of context, ghostwriting in the UK is generally quite a private matter. In a piece for The Telegraph, a ghostwriter said that he's not even been invited to the book launches of books that he's literally written in the past. And lots of ghostwriters aren't even able to talk about the books that they've worked on due to complicated NDAs. Sometimes celebrity memoirs do say things like written with on them, or if you scroll through the acknowledgements at the end, you might be able to find the name of a ghostwriter, but they're often quite well hidden and not really front and center, and definitely not part of the marketing of the book itself. So actually, that's something that's been really interesting about Spare, which is that J.R. Moehringer, who Prince Harry chose to ghostwrite his book, and was reportedly paid somewhere between $1 to $5 million to write it. He has actually been really front and center of how this book has been marketed and lots of the press around the book itself.
I mean, I wouldn't say front and center. Would you? Where have people encountered Mr. Moehringer?
So he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, and he's worked for places like the New York Times before. And he actually wrote his own coming-of-age memoir in 2005, which was called The Tender Bar, and that was turned into a movie directed by George Clooney, who reportedly then introduced Moehringer and Prince Harry. He's actually best known, other than writing or ghostwriting Spare, he's best known for ghostwriting the memoir of the tennis player Andre Agassi.
So I suppose the point is, even if listening to this, we haven't heard of him before, people who know about books might have heard of him before. And it's being discussed that he wrote this book. That's the new thing, Jamie.
Yeah, and he's kind of widely seen within the kind of literary circles as probably the best ghostwriter around.
Well, he's certainly the most successful, isn't he, by definition already?
Yeah. I saw quite a funny thing about how his Twitter feed is just him retweeting all of the praise that he's got, which is lovely. I just think more people should take on that view of Twitter, of just retweeting your own praise. It's not very British, but it's, I think, quite a positive thing to see.
But that's also got him into a bit of trouble, because people on Twitter have spotted that his account has liked a tweet that called Prince Harry, or referred to Prince Harry as being selfish, which is quite interesting to actually see a ghostwriter potentially casting judgment on the subject of one of his books. If it indeed was him, it could have been a mistake.
To be fair, I have liked one of Grant Shapps' tweets in the past, and that doesn't mean anything.
I mean, it is interesting, Mariana, isn't it, in that the conversations between a ghostwriter and their subject should kind of remain private, even if the identity of the writer doesn't. So even if we've got this new era where ghostwriters are going to be more well-known and slightly more public-facing, the way that they go about getting that material, the way that they coax out some of that information, shouldn't really be public domain for the person who's supposedly writing the memoir to feel confident that they can share?
There's definitely this issue of responsibility, right? As your ghostwriter becomes more public, does it mean that the information that they have actually extracted with these very frank admissions, and it's also now all over the newspapers because it is in the book? Does it mean that the ghostwriter had some sort of duty to counsel the author or the subject, in this case a bit tricky to say author, about what sorts of things get included, but are they also being public about it, liable for the coverage that the book gets? And in this sense, I don't know if it's too much of a conspiracy theory, but I find that it might actually help Prince Harry to have someone else to take sort of the blame / fault for some of the things in the book if it gets portrayed as things that were said in private that there was a bit of a blurred line as to whether they would be included in the memoir. And to this point, I saw this article about someone who worked previously with Prince Harry to write a different output, and one of their mechanisms or one of their tactics is to get their subjects to sort of open up over a glass of drink when nothing is being recorded, to get into the bottom of some of the stories that have already been touched upon in the written material. So I wonder where the line is drawn here.
Yeah, but, well, do you think they can rely on that, the Sussexes, Kate? Because it's not like, Prince Andrew and Emily Maitlis, is it? Where clearly he gave approval of the interviewer and then didn't get to approve the final version. This is a case where Harry, as we've just heard, has read the audiobook. I mean, we know that he's read his own book because we've heard him. So, I mean, he's sat there, he's approved every word in it. The publishers has. It's all been done with his cooperation. They even delayed the release date, didn't they? So, can you really convincingly say whichever bit is controversial, the number of Taliban I killed, the frostbitten penis, whatever the bit is, I didn't really mean for that to be public domain. It's very clear that he's been involved.
Yeah, I don't think that it would be an argument for him to say, I didn't know how some of my comments were going to be interpreted in the final product, because as you say, he's literally read the audiobook and he's clearly been incredibly involved every step of the way. He's done a lot of press interviews as well about it. I mean, it appears from the outside like he's proud of the book. And so I think it would then be strange for him to contradict some of what the content contains. I think a lot of commentators seem to suggest that some of his comments, specifically, you mentioned briefly the one about him killing 25 people in the Taliban, should have perhaps not been included in the final product, and that perhaps this ghostwriter, Morenger, could have perhaps been more sensitive about including it. And that's more in terms of not Prince Harry's personal reputation, but threats to national security. And, members of the military have warned that we now could even see a kind of retaliatory attack by the Taliban because of those comments. So obviously that could have severe consequences, and we've got to think about, was that really necessary to have been included?
All right, let's move away a little bit from Prince Harry, because you brought us the subject of ghostwriters in general. I mean, Jamie, do you think the relative prominence of Morenger might encourage readers to start selecting memoirs based not on the celebrity who supposedly it's their life story, but who actually wrote it?
I personally feel quite strongly about this, in the sense that I don't think anyone really believes when they look at memoirs that they're just written by, I mean, it depends on the person, but a lot of the time that they're solely written by that celebrity, because they usually do or famous for something completely different. I'm thinking about sports maybe. So they need someone to help tell their story. And I think that more transparency we get with ghostwriters, the kind of better, because ultimately I want to read something that's interesting and good and takes, is well written most of the time. That's what people are looking for. So why not, involve the best ghostwriters and know who the best ghostwriters are, and then we can read that stuff. And I also think it's not just a kind of inside baseball perspective as a journalist who, is desperate for journalism and journalists to get further ahead. I think it's also true that a lot of the really interesting interviews and feature pieces recently have been written, some of the best interviewers get their name out there as well as anything else. I'm thinking about this week, there was an interview with Jack Monroe in The Guardian that was done by Simon Hattonstone that was like really interesting and was really, it was controversial on Twitter, but it kind of was a very fair way of looking at things. And I would like to see maybe memoirs and autobiographies go more down that route of the interviewer or the person that's the author behind it having a kind of similar placing as the subject themselves.
And Mariana, as someone who reviews books for a living, is ghostwriting a good thing? Does it muddy the water a bit when you're trying to communicate to an audience who wrote the thing and what you think about it?
I was thinking about these ethical dimensions of ghostwriting, and I find that generally people agree that ghostwriting is acceptable when the audience expects it. And we review books mostly in international relations, and it's mostly about the fieldwork research or the theory that the academic has come up with. And so much of the work has also to do with their ability to express these really complex ideas in accessible ways. So the writing itself of their own ideas is also so important that we wouldn't expect ghostwriting. And I feel like there is this nuance, or there's this variance between different fields, and where ghostwriting is a bit more accessible, or is a bit more acceptable, or a bit more common sense, or such as when you think about speechwriters for politicians. Barack Obama had a very famous relationship with his until 2013. But then you get to these like more muddier waters of academic writing and all these platforms that exist now to find whether there's plagiarism. And I think in fields where it depends so much on your on the writing itself, you're reviewing this person's ability to communicate all these ideas and to think through all these concepts, that the writing itself actually makes quite a big difference. And that is something we evaluate the merits of the book on as well.
And Kate, if ghostwriters do become more front and centre, as you put it, do you think that could happen for novels as well? I mean, the real dirty secret is that a lot of the big brand novelists don't entirely write their own work, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A lot of people don't realise that, but ghostwriting is something that we see a lot in fiction as well as non-fiction, particularly with certain big name crime authors, for example.
Yeah, I mean, there are some children's authors who literally don't exist. I mean, they're a brand, aren't they, like Mills and Boon? But I mean, the target audience of 7-year-old girls doesn't know that. Yeah,
I think also a lot of Blyton books continued after she died. She kept bringing books out as well.
Shakespeare, he wasn't real.
I'm glad you managed somehow to bring us around to ludicrous conspiracy. Thank you, all of you. I should say I do write my own questions, but for full transparency, they are co-written by producer Sophie. My thanks to Mariana, Kate, and Jamie. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.